Hi, I'm Bill Arnold. Thank you for listening to this podcast of Real Recovery. There are many more podcasts available at myfaithradio.com. Your support makes this possible. Thank you. Welcome to Real Recovery. Glad you joined us today. Bill Arnold on this side of the studio. And just across the way, a man who knows what he's talking about every once in a while, George P. Fraser.
It happened once.
It did indeed. Yeah.
It's a great day to be here.
Yeah. And if we were going to make a disclaimer, we would say past performance is no indicator of future results.
No, we're hoping it gets better.
We always hope it gets better.
Our story is a remarkable one that you won't believe, and it's true. And we've been doing this show 14 years.
Who's counting, George?
Well, I thought we'd get canned after 6 weeks. And I have never heard anything like this, and I know it to be true. And the step we want to talk about today, step 3, where we made a decision to turn our will and a life for the care of God as we understand it. And we look at that, Bill, when we do that coming off steps 1 and 2, we have the gift of desperation because things aren't going really well, so sure, I'll do this. What people don't realize when they're doing it is you get back into walking with Jesus. He has a plan for your life, and he has a job for you to do. So when I work with guys, and I know you go down to the Salvation Army, as I do every week, you've been doing it a lot longer, and I tell them, you don't want to miss out on what God has for your life. He designed you, made you. You look at Psalm 139, he's numbered our days before he's born. It's in his book. And he's got a lot of good things to serve him that you're not going to want to miss. But you'll miss him if you're not walking with him. We talked about this on the show a couple weeks ago, Bill, where we talked about in the Lord's Prayer, thy will be done. What step 3 really is, God's will is going to happen. You can either fight it or go along with it. And I'm convinced that if he has a job for you to do and you don't want to do it or can't get sober, won't turn it over to get sober, God will find somebody to do it. He doesn't need us. He wants us. And that in itself is too awesome for us to appreciate.
George, I assume step 3 is a step where you're really planting your flag. And you are making that commitment, and you're saying, I surrender. This is it. I've made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understand him. And that seems like obscure language to people who are followers of Jesus, but maybe you would explain what the founders meant by that.
Well, I think what we don't read in that step is that Jesus isn't there, God as you understand him, but we understand him to be Christ. They did that to not turn anybody away, which I think is one of the giant mistakes of all time, but that's a whole nother show. What you're doing is making a decision to turn your will and your life over to God permanently, every day, all the time. We all sin, but that's the best. And it's not a frivolous deal. It's a big deal. The way you and I do it, and most people, is we turn it over daily. We get on our knees before our Creator so we can face all men in the eyes. And really, are you going to walk this out? What happens to a lot of us is we have a problem, so become willing to do what God can, save me, take me, I'm yours. And then we start feeling a little better. And, okay, I'll take that back. God, you don't need to help me here. I have it. No, you don't. Apart from me, you can do nothing, John 15:5. And what I really want to look at here is I don't want you to miss what God has for you. We always say on Real Recovery, it's not about getting sober. It's about getting saved. And the Creator of the universe picks you up, forgives you, and then he's got work for you to do. And I don't want anybody to miss that. I didn't want to do it, and I look back as I've gotten older and go, thank you. That's a lot better than anything I could have done. Didn't waste my life. And tonight's story is better on that part than any we've ever heard.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I'm looking forward to it. So, George, in step 3, you're really saying, I am willing. And I think if you're willing to say that I am willing, That's an incredible step,
Oh, and that came from God in itself. He draws us in,
right?
lets us know, hey, maybe you should change that. People have been telling you that for years, but now it makes sense to you.
Mm-hmm.
That's the Holy Spirit.
And I always thought the founders of this recovery program that we talk about, where it says made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understand Him, that they clearly meant it to be Jesus, and what they were concerned about is where you are with Jesus. And of course, I think that message has gotten watered down over the years, hasn't it?
Well, for a lot of people, God is good, orderly direction. Their higher power is a tree. My God made your higher power. You go to Romans 1, and it talks about the creation is proof of the Creator. And you can get sober and not get saved. And that's harm reduction at its best. So on this program, and the truth is, we want you to find Jesus.
And maybe tonight is the night you find Jesus,
Or today.
Or this morning when you're listening to the show, that you can come to a saving faith by saying yes to the invitation that Jesus gives. He wants to be your good shepherd. He wants to care for you and love you. And all you do is turn your will and your life over to Him. You can do that right now. And if you want to, you can also learn more about walking in faith with Jesus. You can text the word faith to 41224 if you want some more information on that. If we're going to take a little break and come back, our guest is Dr. Marv Seppala. We're awfully looking forward to having him on the program. So thank you for joining us tonight. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Real Recovery. George, I'm extra excited about our guest this week, and I know you are too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
A lot of questions for him.
I know you do. I think there's been, we have both recognized a large level of mental illness in addiction today, where at one point I don't think that was quite the case.
I think there's a lot of mental illness on our show.
Well, that's beside the point.
Yeah, I don't know anybody in recovery that doesn't have mental illness problems. We never used to talk about it. It wasn't okay. It's kind of still that way. There's a stigma.
Mm-hmm.
But I think once you get sober, for a lot of people, if you can, then you realize you have some other issues that everything wasn't you're using.
Mm-hmm. Our guest today is Dr. Marv Seppala. He is a retired chief medical officer at the Betty Ford Hazelton Center, and now he's in a small private practice. Always glad to have him on the show, Marv. Thank you for saying yes to this. I know whenever you say yes, you're saying no to something else, so we appreciate you.
Hey, I'm really glad to be on board today.
Yeah. So we just wanted to start off with letting our audience hear a little bit about your spectacular story, because it is really quite amazing how you ended up where you are today.
It is pretty unusual, that's for sure. What would you like to hear?
How it started, because I remember from last time we were talking about it in the elevator coming up to the studio. And I said, I remember the whole deal about how you were down and out, and I believe you got a job at a lab, and then it took off from there. But if you could give us the backstory on that, I think our listeners will really enjoy it.
Sure, I'm glad to. So I grew up in Stewartville, Minnesota, a small town 11 miles south of Rochester, and started drinking when I was 12. And the first time I drank, I thought, it was magic. I thought something, I didn't know why you had to wait till you were 21 to drink and feel that good. And it felt like I was somehow transformed and the best I'd ever felt in my life. And even on equal terms with the two guys I was with in that barn where we drank, someone's parents' whiskey. And then by 15, I was using multiple substances every day, and I dropped out of high school as a senior at 17. And my parents realized there was a problem at that point. I think they knew something was up, but they didn't know what, and talked with our local minister who actually had just started at the church, and he'd come from Canada. Uh, and I don't know how he knew of Hazelden, but he did, and recommended my parents look into that, and they somehow got me in, and I was the first adolescent treated within the system. And that went. I argued that I didn't belong there for the first 2 weeks, and then I realized I'm just like these older guys here. I just haven't lived as long. I got the same problems, the same issues, everything.
So
You
they
know,
didn't have a separate adolescent facility then?
no, this is yeah, it was 1974, and they didn't have anything but the adult program up in Center City. Yeah, that was the only place, and so there was nothing for me, and actually uh, there wasn't much of anything for adolescents in the whole state. And when I went back home, um, there wasn't even any follow-up for an adolescent with a drug problem at Mayo Clinic. So they told me to go to AA, which was the only thing they told me to do, and it was what the program was based on. And I liked what they were telling me about that, but it seemed like, 11 miles away in Rochester was a long way to go for an AA meeting. It's something I'd never heard of. So I didn't go. And I didn't do anything as a result, except they got me back into high school. And that was nice, but I only lasted 5 days, and got together with an old friend. They told me to stay away from my old friends, and we drove to Minneapolis to a Marshall Tucker Band concert. And I managed to get there without using anything with my friend who was smoking pot in the car and drinking. And I think he did some speed too. And we got to the concert, and someone passed a joint down the aisle, and I just naturally grabbed it and started smoking it without even thinking. It was just, it was like eating breakfast or something. It's so natural. I didn't even consider it. Just did it. So I wasn't planning to relapse. And in fact, I was telling my friend all about treatment all the way up from Rochester. And then I was just off and running. That's all it took. And I went through the graduation ceremony without a diploma. My parents then realized something was going on, that I was using again, and they decided to kick me out of the house and disown me. I'm the oldest of five, so it's probably a good decision, but it was a really difficult one for them, I'm sure, and it was hard on all of us. And and I didn't have a place to go to, so I loaded a few things in a Volkswagen Bug and drove to Rochester to a friend's place and sacked out there, and then went from friend to friend. And I didn't have a job. Finally got one, but I I had a couple of jobs that didn't last because I'd just get a paycheck and disappear. I never got fired. I just didn't show back up. And then I needed another job, so I went to Mayo Clinic to apply and thought I'd become a janitor there because I didn't know what else I could do. I lied on the application, saying I graduated from high school, which I hadn't done. I'd missed 4 months, and my teachers had said I could come and see them at their homes that summer, but I blew that off because I was using and didn't do any of that. Um, so I didn't have a janitor's job at Mayo, and they sent me away. But 2 weeks later, they called my mother because I had to give a phone number someplace and an address, which I didn't have either. And, and she got a hold of my girlfriend who found me, and I went in for an interview, and they sent me over to a cardiovascular research lab. And I was hired as a lab technician under two world famous docs. And that got my attention. I didn't stop. I actually stopped using for 2 weeks when I got that job because I knew if I started using I would lose the job, and it just seemed like so amazing. I couldn't believe that I got this job, and it was just incredible. Um, and and they treated me really well. The doctors who ran the labs, as well as research fellows who'd come from all over the world to work under those two. And the research fellows were early career physicians, trying to get some research on their CVs, and maybe even go into research as part of their careers. But they were younger, and they really took an interest in me. But um, on the first day, two things happened. They oriented me, and during the orientation, pointed to a cabinet and said, "Marv, that's the drug cabinet, and one of your responsibilities is to make sure it's locked at the end of the day every day." And that's something they couldn't have given to anyone who would have paid more attention to that. I couldn't get it out of my mind. Um, and then later that day, I went to HR because I thought I might as well get this over with. And I told them I really haven't graduated from high school. And I plan to. I'm going to see my teachers. It was just all, a lie. I had no plans to see my teachers. I'd already had that opportunity, but I said I did plan to see them, and I was going to get my diploma soon. And they said, "Well, that's okay." They didn't. They just told me to go back to work. You know, it wasn't a problem that I hadn't graduated from high school for some reason. And so I was honest about one thing, although I didn't tell them the whole story by any means. And then I suddenly got this uh, uh, drug cabinet to get out of my head, and I couldn't. And I lasted 2 weeks sober. One of my one of the experiments we were doing, I had to measure out cocaine and make it into a solution to use for the experiments. And um, after 2 weeks, the longest I'd been sober on my own, outside of treatment, I grabbed some cocaine and started using it. And fortunately, uh, was able to keep that job in spite of that. And I missed a week of work just because it got worse and worse with that kind of access to a drug like that. I just couldn't stop. It was all day long, every day, and and I was just I I was realizing the stories that the older guys told me about in treatment of what had happened to them, the things I hadn't had happen to me yet, and I just couldn't stop. And I'd never had withdrawal symptoms, and I started to have the cocaine withdrawals, just a loss of energy and uh, sleepiness basically, and depression. I was just feeling awful. Anytime, like overnight, even between using it, and yet um, that got me to my first AA meeting, and because that's what I was told to do when I was in treatment, I finally managed to go right there in Rochester, and there were two guys there. They were both, or three guys. They were all over 70, and I was 18 at the time. And I don't know what they said. I can't recall at all, but I do know how I felt. And those guys really cared for me. They they took an interest in me. They wanted me to come back, and I went back. And if they hadn't treated me so well, I don't think I would have gone back. But three guys over 70 was kind of like my treatment experience, so it seemed fairly normal to me. And the meeting grew over time to about 12 people, men and women, all walks of life, and I just could not believe how these people talked and shared themselves and described their past drug and alcohol use, mostly alcohol, and how they, wanted me to get better too. Um, and I started to, but then I lasted 6 months, opened that cabinet one day after missing one meeting. They told me just to come every Sunday the one meeting a week, that was the norm back then in that part of the country. And uh, I missed one meeting. I opened that cabinet basically to start an experiment, but I grabbed some cocaine and went to the bathroom and started using. And that afternoon called the guy I'd been meaning to ask to be my sponsor. Hadn't done that, hadn't started working the steps, hadn't started reading the books, hadn't really shared myself with these people. I hardly talked at the meetings. And I told this guy, John, my first sponsor, that all of that. I said, and I told him, I went to treatment and that didn't work. I tried it on my own and that didn't work. Now I tried AA and it doesn't work either. I was absolutely hopeless. I was just desperate. I honestly didn't think there was anything else that could help me. And John said, Marv, AA works fine. You just haven't started. And he told me to do the things that I just described that I wasn't doing. and, and and I did from that day forward, and I've been sober since. So I went back to the lab the next day. I had to weigh out cocaine and put it into solution again. I had to put animals to sleep with anesthetics that I could have stolen and other things that were there, and I didn't. I just kept staying sober, kept going to that meeting, and I started to share myself in the way John suggested with the other people there, and I started to attempt to live my life based on spiritual principles and get honest and do what I needed to do to live a good life.
Yeah. Marv, we're going to take a very short break. George, this is absolutely the fascinating story of his journey.
If it wasn't true, I wouldn't believe
I
it.
wouldn't either. I wouldn't either. So,
And I'm
Marv,
thinking that Mayo had got better cocaine than the guy I got it from, too.
we're going to take a break and be right back. Lots more Real Recovery with Dr. Marv Sepala in just a minute. Welcome back to Real Recovery. So glad to be with Dr. Marv Sepala tonight. He is a nationally known psychiatrist and addiction treatment leader, former chief medical officer of Hazleton, and also now in private practice in the Portland, Oregon area. George, I have to say, and we were saying before the break, it's just an absolutely remarkable story.
And it gets better.
And if it wasn't true, we would swear it was made up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's too good to be made up, though.
Yeah.
Where it ends up.
It's spectacular. All right, Marv, we're going to ask you to pick up where you left off.
Okay,
Yeah.
glad to. So yeah, I was influenced by all those docs, and especially one, a cardiac surgeon from Brazil who had come up to do a research fellowship, and he asked me to um, support him while he was doing surgery on animals, mostly dogs, and he would do cardiac surgery, and I'd be um, helping him out and learning how to do it, and while we did that, just standing across the surgical table from one another, he would tell me these stories of healing, and he was just a wonderful man. And I just basically wanted to be like him. That was because I was early in recovery. I had no sense of self, didn't know what I was going to do with myself. And so I started thinking, maybe I could become a doctor. And
It just sounds so funny to me, Marv.
it does. It had never crossed my mind. And I don't, I hadn't even graduated from high school. So
Yeah, you're not making any sense right now.
that's right. And so I called my teachers and they said I could come and see them in the evenings because it was during the school year and they allowed me to finish all my classes. So I got and then they gave me a diploma. Um, and so I had, in spite of not thinking that was ever going to happen, suddenly I had a high school diploma. And the truth is, it was my hardest diploma to obtain. because of everything that happened and what I had to go through to get there. Um, but then I got this manila envelope that they use at a lot of organizations that has, someone, lines on it and has name and then department,
Mm-hmm.
so and I got one sent to me and it said Dr. Marvin Sepola. And I still have that thing in a box someplace here in the house because I had started thinking I wanted to be like those docs. And suddenly this thing showed up, and I decided, I better tell somebody about this thought of mine. So first I told my girlfriend Linda, who's my wife now, and has been since we were 20. Um, and then I told John, my sponsor, I said, John, I got to go to college because I want to be a doctor. Now, I hadn't even been sober a full year yet since that relapse. And John knew me as this high school dropout who showed up at AA one day. And if he would have said, Marv, I don't know, or if he would have doubted me in the least, I would have just crumbled because I had no self-esteem, no self-confidence. I just had an idea. And and I was starting down this path of recovery. And John said, Marv, if it's God's will, it'll happen. And I just ran with that. It was exactly what I needed to hear because I didn't know if I could do it or not. And yet suddenly I'm working in this job that I didn't expect to get. And so I decided I'll figure this out. And I made a mistake and just kind of thought I could figure out how to go to college on my own. So I did my first visit to a college. I went up to St. Olaf and had a tour with a bunch of other potential students. And the guy leading the tour seemed to know everyone we ran into. And he'd stop and talk with these other students and ask them to say a few words to us. And I don't know if it was set up. It didn't seem to be because it seemed really random. And and I was so impressed by that, just how friendly these people were, and the school itself. I decided that's where I wanted to go, and that's the only place I applied to. And in my mind, I was thinking, well, if I get in, I get in. If I don't, I don't. I wasn't going to go to going to college anyway, so it didn't really matter to me at the time. And I had forgotten when I applied just to that one school that I didn't know what my high school transcript would look like. And if it would have been an accurate representation of what happened, I doubt I'd have got in. But back then, I had to get the transcript, so my high school sent it to me, and it said that I missed 10 days in my senior year, random days, kind of like, getting sick once in a while, and it didn't describe the 4 months I missed. It didn't describe getting my diploma about a year and a half or so late. Nothing like that. Just 10 days. And so I don't know who did that. I don't know how that happened. But that's what I sent to St. Olaf with my grades and everything else, and I got in. So
Which is remarkable because it's not
it
an
is
easy school to get
remarkable.
into, and especially with your high school resume, which was very spotty at best.
That's right. I did have good grades until I quit. Um, and that was one of the reasons I quit. In fact, I didn't quit thoughtfully. I didn't have a plan to quit. I have to admit, I was using every day and I didn't want to go to school, but I had done some speed one day and ended up at home that evening somehow with my physics book, and I did all the assignments. I never studied. I just didn't study, and so why I had the book at home and why I did that night, I think I don't even know why I went home. But there I was, and I did all these physics, you know, problems, and I went to class the next day, And I was the only one in the class that knew how to do the problems, and the teacher had me come up to the board and write them out, and I did that. And then that night, I went out and drank and smoked a bunch of pot and just got, wasted. And went to school the next morning, went to physics. We had a test on the very same problems. And I sat there and I put my name on my paper, and that was it. I could not remember a thing. I couldn't remember how to do it. I'd just done it the board the day prior.
Hmm.
And I went up to hand my paper in within a couple minutes, and my teacher, Frank Daniels, looked at me and said, Marv, is something wrong? And I just couldn't even look him in the eye. And I walked out the door of the class. I walked out the school, and I never went back. I couldn't tolerate, my own shame about not being able to even put anything more than my name on that test. So that was how I dropped out of high school, not with without, just basically because I was an addict and couldn't live with myself and the consequences of it. And that was before treatment, So but anyway, back to St. Olaf. I started on my first year anniversary in recovery. My first college classroom I walked into was on my first year anniversary. And the guys that lived around me, including a friend of you guys, Jack,
Mm-hmm.
was my a next door neighbor. And all these guys were just wonderful guys. And I told them about my recovery story, and they just pragmatically said, well, yeah, you shouldn't do that. And, and understood that I should stay sober, but didn't understand it much beyond that. And that was fine because they were still supportive of me. And I came back to the dorm one evening before Christmas, late in the first semester, and there was a Christmas party going on. And I started walking to the punch bowl, and four of those guys ran up to me from different corners of the room and said, Marv, Marv, you can't have any of that punch. We spiked it. And protected me from a mistake that I could have made by drinking that stuff. And then one time I was somehow, I don't know what was going on with me, but I'm sitting in a room, dorm room with all these guys, and they're smoking pot. And I had no reason to be in there. I'm not thinking about smoking pot, but I was talking with some of them as they walked in there, and I ended up sitting there. I wasn't even thinking once the pot started going around. And then Jack walked in the room and put his arm around my shoulder and said, Marv, I got to talk to you about something. I don't know how he knew I was in there. I don't know, what he was thinking, but he got me out of there immediately. And and thank goodness he did. I don't. I mean, who knows? It's just so easy to fall back into that stuff
Mm-hmm.
early in
Totally.
recovery.
Yep.
And and then I got married after our freshman year. Linda and I went off to Drake University. My memory started coming back halfway through the year at St. Olaf. I really started to perform well, and my grades were great, and they were even better when I got to Drake, and I got back into Mayo to go to medical school, where I planned to be a cardiac surgeon, just like the Brazilian doc I described, and half we started doing clinical rotations during my second year. And my first patient that I ever did a physical exam on, we'd done physical exams on each other and then on volunteers, but this was the first time ever on a real patient that had come halfway across the country for surgery. And I start to examine him, and all of a sudden he says, do you see the birds in the tree in the corner there? And I said, what do you mean? He said, oh, those birds singing in that tree right there, and pointed to the corner of the room. And I realized he was seeing and hearing things, and he was having hallucinations. He was in alcohol withdrawal and actually in DTs. And so my first patient ever was in alcohol withdrawal. One of my first emergency room experiences, I had to go and sew up a guy's forehead who had been at a local bar in Grand Meadow, Minnesota, and fell and had a huge gash across his forehead. And while I'm doing that, he's talking to me like he's in a blackout. He thinks I'm his buddy. He thinks he's still in the bar. And he doesn't even know I'm trying to sew up his forehead, and he's trying to move my arms out of the way. And I'm a medical student. It's the first time I've sewn up anybody, and I'm trying to keep a sterile field, and he's trying to cause an unsterile field, and so the same thing happened over and over. One person with alcoholism or other drug problems after another, and we weren't doing anything about it. We weren't referring people to treatment. We often wouldn't even put it in the chart and diagnose it. I always put it in my note, but no one reads the medical student's note except for the residents and the attending that are overseeing your work. But the insurance companies aren't gonna, or anyone else. And we wouldn't refer them for any help or even just get a consult from somebody to determine what else to do. And it was the only disease I saw that happen with. I was being taught in a medical school to diagnose everything that the person has, to get the whole history, to be sure that I've covered all my bases and do a thorough job for the individual in front of me. And yet when it came to this disease, we weren't doing anything about it. And some of the attendings would, the staff doctors would talk with me about this, and we'd have a bit of a discussion, but we'd never do anything about it. And I was going to the same AA meeting I got sober in, and there happened to be two Mayo doctors at that meeting. And week after week, I'm complaining about how we are not helping people with addiction.
Wow. Boy, that was a defining moment, wasn't it?
It
All
was.
right. Marv, let us take a little break. We're going to be right back with Dr. Marv Sepula. You're listening to Real Recovery with Bill and George. We'll be right back. We're back with Dr. Marv Sepula. And George, if God isn't involved in this story, it is never going to happen.
Because it's all true.
It's all true. How do you go from being a high school dropout drug addict to the head of the Hazleton Clinic, chief medical officer? It's amazing.
No,
It's just amazing.
it's almost like it didn't happen, but it did.
Yeah, it did. All right, Marv, we're just kind of dying to find out this phase that George and I talk about all the time on the show is God doesn't make us sober without giving us a job to do. So how did you end up in the position you were, and how did God open those doors?
Okay. Well, I said I was complaining about this at AA, and these two docs took me aside one day after another complaint about, no one paying any attention to addiction in my medical training. And they said, Marv, you have got to do something about it. And it opened my eyes to possibility. It was as if, they just said what I needed to hear at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had a psychiatry rotation. I really enjoyed it. And I decided I didn't have to be a surgeon. I think I'm going to go into psychiatry and specialize in addiction. And I ended up going to University of Minnesota for all of that, which was perfect because I looked into some other programs, and the minute I mentioned that I was in recovery, they wanted nothing to do with me. And Mayo didn't have a fellowship in addiction at the time, so University of Minnesota was a better place for me, and they actually did not mind that I was in recovery. In fact, they said that was a good thing because I had some experience that could be helpful to people. The only place that even suggested that. So I end up at the university, and um, I I had met Dan Anderson, who helped get Hazelden off the ground. Dan was a psychologist at Wilmer State Hospital and went to Hazelden to be the first, um, you know, uh, kind of CEO from outside the organization, and really turned it into what it became. Um, and I met him at an alumni function, the first one I ever went to, uh, he just happened to sit at a picnic table across from Linda and I with his wife, and so when I went back and saw him a few times, and then during my training at University of Minnesota, I started to give some alumni talks at Hazelden, and I'd go meet with Dan, and he just took me under his wing and taught me a lot about treatment there and addiction, and introduced me to almost everybody in the area in the field, and really helped me out and helped kind of steer me along. Um, and so I finished my training, and I ended up, I couldn't find a full-time job in addiction for a psychiatrist. That was an odd thing back then, that there really were no full-time jobs. Um, and, but I found kind of a part-time, almost a half-time job out in Oregon, with a couple other jobs promised as well in the same system. And that was better than anything else I could come up with. And so ended up moving out here. And after 6 months of working in this little hospital doing co-occurring disorders work, which is people that have both psychiatric illness and addiction, which was basically what I was trained to do and what I still do. Uh, they opened a treatment center in a little town southwest of Portland at Newberg, Oregon, and um, they were just treating physicians, which is odd, and it went bankrupt in 2 years. However, they gave me a job, a part-time job there too. So I cobbled together 5 or 6 jobs and got all kinds of experience really quick in different organizations and different with different groups of people. Worked in a Native American program, worked with adolescents and women, and just all kinds of great stuff. And then I got asked to by a friend who I met through Hazelden if I wanted to come back and be the first corporate medical director, they called the job that time. And I got that job, but and we moved back to Minnesota, but it wasn't the right. They didn't have a plan for that job. There just wasn't much going on at the time. I think they knew they wanted a chief, kind of a person doing this particular job, but they didn't know what to do with me when I got there. And so I actually left after 9 months because it just wasn't, there wasn't anything there for me, and they didn't have me doing the things I'd expected, and so it just didn't work out. But um, a couple years later, I got hired back to be the corporate medical director because now there was more than one site, and I did that for almost 20 years, trying to really help Hazel and Betty Ford at the end. Um, I was overseeing all the clinical care. I tried to enhance the treatment services and improve our outcomes, which was a wonderful thing about working there because most treatment centers say they know their outcomes of the people that go through treatment, but most of them don't actually do studies to determine, from a research perspective, the actual outcomes. And that was something that started very early on by Dan Anderson and one of the benefactors, Pat Butler, really emphasized that, and had been going on for a long time with a small research department that was aligned with the university. And we did some studies while I was there with the university and with Mayo Clinic too for the first time, which was just a treat for me. So I ended up having just a remarkable career. And when I say that, it's like you guys were saying. I mean, how could this ever happen? But also, when I left medical school, I told one of the attendings at Mayo, a neurologist, I think, he asked me what I was going to do, and I said, I'm going to go do a psychiatry residency, and I'm going to specialize in addiction. And he said, You're throwing away a good career in medicine. And I had a great career and just a wonderful time, and I got to give back in ways that I never even had considered early on when I made that decision to go down that path. And
And to God be the glory for all he did, orchestrating and navigating your way through all of this. Because talk about the odds being against you. Just as I hear your
Oh,
story, Marv, I go, come on, the odds are stacked against you.
that's for sure.
No, there are no odds.
Yeah,
Nobody
that's
give
even
you
better.
odds
There's no
on
odds.
this.
There's no odds.
Yeah.
When I was in medical school, one of my buddies uh, was hanging out in Stewartville, where I grew up, at a bar there once in a while, and he met a guy that was a year behind me in school that was in a lot of sports like I was before the drugs and alcohol caught up with me. And he asked this guy, he said, "Do you know Marv Sepala?" And he said, "Yeah, I do." And um, they said, "Well, what do you know about him?" He said, "I don't know. Is he still alive?"
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and that just kind of sums it up. I didn't have great prospects.
I, well, I laugh, Marv, every time you say things like, when I was in medical school, I'll go, well, hang on, you're a high school dropout drug addict. Those kids don't go to medical school. The whole story,
No,
yeah, is remarkable.
If
yeah,
I was talking to one of my clients, I would refer this story out to the psychiatrist. Right? Fair? That's true, isn't
Yeah.
it? It
this guy's delusional.
no, it's so good, but it's true. But not only did I look at the names, Bill. He worked at Mayo.
Yeah.
He was the chief medical officer at Hazelden. These are the top names around.
Mhm.
God really brought you out of your addiction and raised you up to really help a lot of people. It's remarkable.
Yeah, it really is. And I've just been so fortunate, and I'm extremely grateful, especially for all the people who helped me along the way. I I mean, I needed a lot of help. I got a lot of help and didn't even know know it at the time, a lot of it. Yeah, it took kind of looking in retrospect to see just how many people helped me out.
And that's the strength of recovery. And we talk about this often on the show, is that community is so essential. And it sounds like community came around you, loved on you, looked out for you, and didn't let you slip through the cracks.
Yeah, that is so true. And you know, the first meeting I went to with those three guys over 70, I said I didn't know what they said to me, but I think they loved me. I think they expressed love, and that's one of the things that I think I got almost every time I went to an AA meeting.
Yeah.
Um,
And
and
I'm
I experienced a lot of that in my life.
and I'm thinking affectionately about these two cardiac doctors you work for as an 18-year-old kid,
Oh,
the Mayo Clinic. You're in the research lab, and they're looking out for you. They're not
that-
disregarding you, Marv. They're paying attention to you. I think that's beautiful.
yeah, they were really helpful. They wrote letters for me for college and for medical school. In fact, when I applied to Mayo for medical school, one of those two docs had become the dean of education for the Mayo Clinic, and he was on the board of governors and the board of trustees. He was a real administrative guy in addition to the research. And um, so when I applied to medical school and they opened up, my application, there was a letter from
Wow.
the boss, the dean of the medical school.
That's impressive. Marv, your story is spectacular. We're so grateful that you took time to tell it. I know you're going to be a great encouragement to so many people, and to God be the glory, the way he orchestrated you through your journey. Thank you for doing the show.
Mark, you've been a real
Well,
inspiration to me, and I know everybody who hears this. And what a great life.
Yeah.
oh,
Have a
thank you.
Have a great rest of your day. That is all the time we have for Real Recovery. Thank you so much. If you missed any of this show, head over to the podcast. Check it out from the beginning. I know you'll be blessed by it. Thanks for listening. Programming like this is made available through your support. Information available at myfaithradio.com.